Have you ever felt the quiet sting of being dismissed? Of being treated like your very existence was inconvenient? That was my life, growing up under my mother's shadow of judgment. She had this way of making everything about competition, about proving who was better, who deserved more. And I was always on the losing side, even when I had nothing to lose. The thing is, I never thought revenge would be my method of survival. But sometimes survival wears the face of strategy, and strategy tastes bitterly sweet when it is served slowly. It started with a Christmas party. I had just gotten a promotion, a raise, a recognition I had worked for silently for years, while my mother had made sure the family knew every tiny success of my sister, who, by the way, she constantly praised for doing it all on her own. I walked into that party with a sense of calm I had never felt before. My mother, ever sharp and cutting, glanced at me and said, "You are just jealous and broke. You will never be like your sister." I smiled. Not because I agreed, not because I wanted to fight, but because I had a plan. Man, you have no idea how satisfying it is to see the surprise in someone's eyes when you take control, in ways they could never anticipate. I spent the next few weeks quietly analyzing everything. Accounts, assets, patterns. I knew what my mother had done for years. She managed the family finances, controlled the flow of information, dictated who got what, and always ensured that I felt powerless. I wasn't powerless anymore. Not even close. I started small. I froze a few minor accounts, just enough to test reactions. At first, it was subtle. My sister called, confused about a transfer that didn't go through. My mother tried to manage it behind the scenes, but every call she made, every inquiry she initiated came back to me. I was careful, calculated. No one could trace the changes back to me directly. But the pattern was becoming undeniable. Then came the escalation. I accessed the main accounts, the ones my mother thought she had secured under layers of security and trust. I froze everything. Every major transaction, every available fund, completely inaccessible. And then I waited. The phone calls started immediately. 92 in total over 3 days. I listened quietly to my mother's frantic voice on the first call, demanding explanations, trying to intimidate. I let her talk. I didn't respond. Not yet. She was angry, flustered, panicked. The sheer control she had, exerted over the family, was slipping through her fingers, and she could feel it even if she did not understand why. By the second day, my sister called, tears in her voice, asking if I could just release a little money. I stayed calm. I did not explain. I did not negotiate. I let them stew. Their frustration, their worry was intoxicating. For years, I had been told I was incapable, unworthy, jealous, broke. And now, quietly, with precision, I was the one holding the power. I arranged a meeting after the chaos had simmered. Just me and my mother, alone in her living room. She looked at me, eyes wild, trying to mask the fear with sarcasm. "You have gone too far this time," she said. "You do not understand consequences." I leaned back in my chair and smiled softly. "I understand consequences perfectly," I said. "I understand them better than anyone. You taught me to anticipate every move, every trick, every manipulation. You taught me that survival means knowing when to strike and when to wait." She recoiled slightly, like I had thrown a verbal punch. For years, she had underestimated me, assumed my meekness was weakness. But she had no idea how carefully I had studied her, how meticulously I had prepared. This was not revenge born of rage. It was revenge born of understanding, born of precision, born of decades of observation. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice cracking slightly. "Why are you doing this?" I paused. It was important to let her feel the weight of every word. "Because you forgot one lesson," I said slowly. "Power is not about fear. It is about respect. And you do not get respect by crushing people, by manipulating them, by making them feel small. You lose it. And now you are learning that lesson." The impact was immediate. My mother, who had always been the center of control, the center of attention, realized the game had shifted. Every call, every demand, every frantic attempt to regain control was futile. I was not just holding the keys to the accounts, I was holding the narrative. After the meeting, I moved quickly. I made a series of financial adjustments, legal, meticulous, leaving no trace of personal gain, because this was not about money. It was about control, about balance, about finally having the upper hand in a world where I had been conditioned to feel powerless. I froze assets in ways that made my mother rethink every assumption she had ever made about me. She had believed she knew me completely. She did not. The calls, the messages, the frantic texts, they continued. But by now, I was prepared. I had scripts, planned responses, legal cover, and most importantly, patience. Every interaction was carefully managed. I watched my mother struggle with her own pride, her own ego. For decades, she had used her superiority as a weapon. Now she was disarmed. One evening, after the storm of calls had subsided, I sat alone in my apartment sipping wine, reflecting on the entire process. The calm satisfaction of strategic revenge is different from the satisfaction of impulsive retaliation. It is quieter, deeper, more complete. You do not need to shout, to confront, to argue. You simply let the structures you understand collapse around the very people who underestimated you. By the third week, my mother reached out, her tone softer, almost pleading. We need to talk. Can you help us fix this? I let the silence stretch. Long enough for her to feel the power imbalance. Long enough for her to understand that I was not her child anymore in the way she thought. I responded, calmly, deliberately, we will fix this. But on my terms. That statement changed everything. From that moment on, I had full agency. Not because I was cruel, but because I had finally stepped into the space I had been denied for years. My mother learned to treat me differently. She learned to respect the boundaries I set. My sister, too, had to recalibrate. To acknowledge that I was no longer competing in their game, I was running my own. Months passed. I continued to manage the account strategically, allowing access slowly, under conditions that reinforced respect and responsibility. Each decision, each action, reinforced the lesson: underestimate me, dismiss me, and you will see just how carefully a quiet mind can orchestrate its revenge. Through this entire ordeal, I realized that family dynamics are often a battlefield of perception, of control, of ego. The people who seem closest can often be the most ruthless. And yet power is not in shouting, not in asserting dominance overtly, but in calculated moves, patience, and quiet authority. I had learned this lesson at a cost, but the victory was profound, complete, and lasting. Even now, when I reflect on those 92 calls, the frantic attempts to regain control, I smile. Not because I am cruel, but because I am free. Free from the patterns of manipulation, free from the expectations of unearned superiority, and free from the need to prove myself through obedience. I had rewritten the rules, not with anger, but with precision, patience, and an unshakable calm. The most satisfying part? Watching the realization dawn, slowly, painfully, that the child they thought powerless had become the orchestrator, the strategist, the one with control. Every word I had been told for years, every insult, every dismissal, every "you will never succeed," had fueled a meticulous plan that unfolded perfectly. And in that quiet satisfaction, I understood something profound. Revenge is not about chaos. It is about clarity. It is about demonstrating irrevocably that the assumptions of the past no longer apply. That the underestimated can, with patience and intelligence, reclaim not just respect but authority, independence, and freedom. By the time the dust settled, the family dynamics had shifted permanently. My mother, my sister, even my brother, learned that I was not to be dismissed, underestimated, or manipulated. I had created boundaries, enforced respect, and reclaimed the narrative of my life. The frozen accounts were more than a financial maneuver. They were a statement, a demonstration, a strategic victory in a long battle for autonomy. And so, as I sit here now recounting this story, I do not feel anger or bitterness. I feel power, clarity, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that I survived, I prevailed, and I did it in a way that no one could reverse or undermine. The 92 calls, the frozen accounts, the panic, the fear, it all led to a single, undeniable truth. I am in control of my life, my power, and my destiny. After the dust settled, I thought I could finally breathe. I thought the lesson had been learned, that my mother and sister had finally recognized that I was no longer the timid child they could dismiss. But man, life has a funny way of reminding you that control is never absolute. Just when I thought I had won, just when I allowed myself a small sense of peace, the cracks began to show. It started with subtle tests. My mother, ever cunning, began dropping hints about financial emergencies she needed help with, always framed as innocent, always framed as family loyalty. My sister, emboldened by years of favoritism, began pushing for access to funds, arguing that I was overreacting and holding grudges. I listened quietly, smiling to myself. Every attempt they made to test me, to poke at the boundaries, only confirmed one thing: I had to remain vigilant. I had to stay several moves ahead. Then came the email. An anonymous tip, carefully worded, suggesting that someone in the family was planning to access the accounts behind my back. It was subtle, almost innocuous, but my instincts screamed at me. I began monitoring every transaction, tracking every login, every small move, every subtle communication. The truth hit me like ice water. Someone was trying to sabotage the work I had done, to reclaim the power I had painstakingly seized. And I knew exactly where to start looking. I called my lawyer. Not to react, not to panic, but to prepare. Every document, every transaction, every minor account adjustment had been executed with precision, legality, and airtight records. There was no fear here, only strategy. I traced patterns, followed digital footprints, and identified the perpetrator, my sister. She had assumed that I was soft, that the calm exterior meant weakness, that the lessons of the past were already forgotten. She had never understood that my silence was never ignorance. It was preparation. I decided to confront her, not angrily, not in a shouting match, but strategically. I invited her for coffee at the small cafe we used to frequent as kids. She arrived, confident, smug, thinking she was the one about to reclaim control. I smiled warmly. It has been a long time, I said. Her smirk faltered slightly, but she brushed it off. Yes, it has. We need to talk, she said. I let her speak first. She launched into excuses, rationalizations, stories about why she needed access and why she deserved certain things. I listened. I nodded politely, absorbing every word, every lie, every misstep. Then calmly I leaned forward and said, "Do you remember the lessons you learned last year? The ones about underestimating me? About thinking I would never act?" Her face paled. She knew immediately. She had forgotten something I had never forgotten: patience, precision, control. I could see her trying to gauge whether I had caught her, whether she had miscalculated. I let the silence stretch. It was deliberate. It was delicious. "I know what you tried to do," I said quietly. "I know every login attempt, every unauthorized transfer, every single moment you thought I would not notice. And the thing is, I did notice. I noticed, I prepared, and I countered." Her eyes widened, panic starting to bubble beneath the surface. She had assumed the rules had changed, that I had softened, that my previous lessons had been forgotten. She had never understood that my strategy was not a one-time move. It was a permanent shift in the balance of power. You froze the accounts?" she stammered. Her voice shook. "But how?" I smiled. "You think I acted alone? I have legal cover. I have digital proof. Every transaction, every attempted move documented and secured. The moment you tried to bypass my control, the safeguards triggered. I am not just protecting myself. I am protecting what is rightfully mine, and what you have tried to manipulate for years." She sat back, defeated, unsure of what to say. I let the silence stretch again, allowing the weight of reality to settle in. This was not about money anymore. It had never been about money. It was about power, control, respect, and finally being acknowledged as an equal rather than a subordinate. Over the next few weeks, the tension escalated. My mother began sending subtle messages, attempts to reconcile, mixed with passive-aggressive comments about generosity and fairness. My sister, on the other hand, tried to regain favor, using charm, apologies, and even small gifts. I remained calm, deliberate, and unyielding. Every approach they made was carefully analyzed, every step countered. I had learned to anticipate their moves in ways they could not comprehend. Then came the final move. I knew I had to ensure this power dynamic was permanent. Temporary control was not enough. I needed a lasting shift. I proposed a family meeting, formal, structured, legally backed, where all accounts, assets, and responsibilities would be discussed openly. I sent invitations, documents, and an agenda that made it clear I was in charge of the process. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. My mother, my sister, and even my brother, who had largely remained neutral, took their seats, expecting some kind of concession, some show of weakness. They were about to learn just how deep my strategy went. I started the meeting calmly. I presented every detail: account freezes, legal safeguards, transaction logs, and the unauthorized attempts. I spoke slowly, deliberately, allowing the reality to sink in. Every word was a demonstration of control, every explanation a lesson in accountability. My mother's face shifted from disbelief to fear, my sister's from smugness to panic. Even my brother leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing that I had become the orchestrator of our family dynamics. "You see," I said, "this is not about revenge. It is about responsibility, transparency, and respect. For years, I have been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored. That ends today." I watched as the realization settled in. For decades, they had wielded power through manipulation and fear. Now they understood that I had rewritten the rules. And I had done it quietly, calmly, and with precision. No shouting, no dramatics, just strategic, unassailable action. After the meeting, I made adjustments to the accounts, ensuring long-term security and control, while gradually allowing access under conditions that reinforced respect and equality. It was not about punishment. It was about teaching a lesson that would last a lifetime. The family, now forced to operate within boundaries I had established, had to adapt to acknowledge my authority and to treat me with the respect I had long been denied. Weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. My mother and sister, having learned their lessons, adjusted their behavior. My brother, quietly impressed, began seeking guidance rather than attempting to control, and I finally felt the freedom of absolute agency. The 92 frantic calls, the panicked attempts to regain control, the subtle tests, they had all led to this moment: equilibrium. Even now, I reflect on that period with a sense of clarity. Revenge, when executed strategically, is not chaos. It is precision. It is patience. It is understanding the dynamics, anticipating the moves, and acting in ways that are undeniable and permanent. I did not seek to humiliate. I sought to establish boundaries, enforce respect, and reclaim my life from the people who had dismissed me for too long. The final act came unexpectedly. My sister, humbled and wary, approached me quietly one evening. She apologized, not for her attempts to undermine me, but for the years of subtle competition, for the times she had benefited from favoritism, and for the lack of acknowledgement of my capabilities. I accepted her apology calmly with grace. It was important she understood that the lesson was not cruelty. It was empowerment. My mother followed cautiously, still navigating the shift in dynamic. She admitted softly that she had underestimated me, that she had failed to recognize my abilities, and that she had relied too heavily on assumptions and past behavior. I forgave her silently, but the boundaries remained. The respect was no longer optional, it was institutionalized. In the end, I learned something profound. Power is rarely about overt control or domination. True power is subtle, quiet, and unassailable. It is the ability to act with foresight, to anticipate moves, to enforce consequences without chaos, and to teach lessons that cannot be forgotten. I had transformed from the overlooked child into the orchestrator of family dynamics, and the sense of quiet satisfaction was unparalleled.